name and today's date, which is the 19th.
Hi, Jeff. It's the 19th of June, and we're here at the Des Moines Radio Group on Locust in downtown Des Moines.
All right. How is it that Steve Gibbons decided he wanted to be a broadcaster?
We go back to 1960 and probably starting at Tech High School.
Mm-hmm.
And the Des Moines Public Schools had a facility there called KDPS, which was AM, FM TV, or pardon me, FM TV. The TV later became Channel 11 and went off on its own and is much bigger now than it was in the 60s. I worked with there with Russ Odegaard and Dave Odegaard and Ralph Joy and a lot of the people that started public television, public radio. And I went to North High School during the afternoon or during the morning, and then in the afternoon I'd go over to Tech and took radio television. I went to summer school a couple of summers, so I had extra credits and was able to have my afternoons free in my senior year, so I chose to go to KDPS. Like a lot of people, I guess, I just listened to the radio, and there were people on the radio that I tried to emulate and play the music, and Buddy and I had fake record companies where we actually had his record company, I think, was called RPM, and the R, actually I think that was his name backwards. Yeah, RPM, Michael Paul Rubel. Anyway, he picked RPM as his record label, and I went with something else. I can't remember what it was, really, to tell you the truth. But as songs would come out, and we would hear these songs, we would take them. It was sort of like fantasy baseball, you know, where you'd make a fantasy team, but instead we had fantasy recordings. And we had an attic. He lived in a 3-story home by over on 9th Street by Union Park, and his folks had a big 3-story home, and in the top was an attic type affair that we made into like a radio station, and we'd go up there and we just pretend like we were on the radio and play these songs, and so that was it, I guess, kind of a fantasy kind of world situation for a couple of high school guys.
So you're a high school guy in preteen in the late 50s in Des Moines. What were you listening to? What stations were really popular at that point that would lead someone to say, I want to do this for a living?
Actually, I don't think I really noticed the radio much. I guess if I was to take a quick thumbnail here, radio as a youngster was adventure shows like The Lone Ranger and Roy Rogers and those kind of things that I would listen to on the radio. And then there was kind of a void there where I don't remember a whole lot of radio programming appealing to me. I remember being with adults. For some reason, I've often thought of this when I was in summer school. My mom worked, and I would stay with my grandparents, and my grandmother loved these old soap operas that used to be on radio, the Argyle Sunday, and I can't think of all the shows, but I can remember sitting in the kitchen during summer vacation and drawing or doing something, doodling or something in the kitchen, maybe helping her prepare a meal, I don't know, but I can remember these soap opera type of shows going on, and I was always impressed by the announcers that would come on and read the commercials or do the station identifications, and I always thought that was kind of neat.
And of course, those were the serials that then moved to television.
No,
in
exactly.
many cases.
Yeah, exactly,
Sure.
exactly. But there again, it was kind of it was the special effects kind of things, the announcers, the special effects that really caught my imagination more than the dialogue. I guess what I found out later, the sound effects people that were on my Western radio shows that made the clomping noise of the horse's hooves or the gunfire or the ricochet bullet, and they had to do that all without a computer. I mean, they did it all with large ETs, transcribed discs, and sometimes there'd be 30, 40 cuts on there, and they'd have this legend in front of them, and they'd have to find the right cut to have a bullet ricocheting off a rock or whatever. When you think about that, that's a lot of manual labor that had to be done in an intense amount of in a short amount of time in an intense fashion, because somebody was reading dialogue and you had to match it with all your clomps and your door slamming and your bag of sand falling on the floor to simulate a dead body or whatever else.
All this needle dropping.
Yeah,
that
yes.
People today just don't even know what that would be.
Yeah. So that's what kind of fascinated me. And then one time I was able to, after I was a certain age, I was able to get downtown and stare in the windows of the radio stations and see the actual program in progress, and watch. Of course, the music had changed by then. There was Elvis and some of the other genre that appealed to me as a child growing up, and so I became involved with that. And I had a transistor radio, straight from Japan, and I would listen to that thing until it would die at night. I'd fall asleep with it in bed and wake up in the morning and the batteries would be dead, so I'd have to stop at the store and buy more batteries for my transistor radio.
Maybe a little 9-volt or even before that.
Yeah, I think they were 9 volts. Not sure about the size on the batteries, but I went through them. They didn't last as long, of course, as batteries now. So, but I'd fall asleep listening to the radio, and it was fun to what we call DXing, which was to get long distance stations and to run a wire out the bedroom window in your room and try and find stations in New York and Chicago and Arkansas, Little Rock, and Dallas, and Minneapolis, and all these stations that were doing rock programming and had all these announcers that, again, you'd try to pick up some of their traits and sound like them, and so that's what it all is about.
And I teach at Wartburg College in addition to doing this kind of thing, and that's, to me, what's missing of what I call the kids now, is that they know they want to do it, but with digital tuning, you can't just sit there with your radio at night, like you say you did, like I know I did, and you just tweak it a little bit, and for those who don't experience it, what's the joy of being able to, in essence, say, I got KAAY, I've got WLS, or I picked up KOA, or this kind of thing. When you're a kid, what does that mean to be bringing in all of these sounds into your little world?
Well, it's if you're in seeking style, if you're critiquing as you listen, and you're looking for styles that you're trying to find something that will work for you, it's like a catalog. I mean, it's like going through a catalog, and you hear all these announcers from these large markets, and you pick up ideas, chatter, phrases, cliches. You got to remember, in the 50s and 60s, there was a ton of cliches. I mean, it was a lot of, phrase radio. I mean, it was just, daddy-o the radio kind of stuff. I mean, it was just all that kind of sing-song, almost a poetry in a way of, there was a man here in Des Moines, Ray Vecellio, who was at KSO, and his air name was Big Al. Well, he was Big Al, your radio pal. And he actually had, created this kind of poetry, this sing-song kind of rhyme, a meter, if you would, of his presentation of songs. He's at CCO in Minneapolis as a salesman now for many, many years. but Big Al, your radio pal, he was at KSO at 1910 Ingersoll, which is now Triad Productions. But when I drive by there, that's the first commercial radio station that I worked for was KSO at 1910 Ingersoll. It was the first commercially licensed station that I worked for, and he was one of the people that, you know, I'd listen to besides the WLS, besides the WABC, you know, in Chicago, in New York, and Chicago and around, you know, Little Rock, what was it, WHB in Kansas City. But Big Al, your radio pal, Big Al was there, and he was he worked with a guy named Jack Gilbert, who's gone now. Jack was out of California, and Jack preceded him. And we used to have 3-hour shifts. He'd work 3 hours, and they did 3-hour shifts. But they had this thing where the limousine was bringing Big Al up, and of course he had a little bit of mafia overtone. They did a little stereotyping. In the 60s and 50s, you could get by with that a little more than you can now, but he had the limo, and the guys would come in and check out the studio, make sure there was no bombs or assassins anywhere around, and they had all these voices of Luigi and all these guys that would come in, and then Big Al would come in, and you'd have the Big Al's girls, you know, they'd be giggling in the background, and it was just kind of a thing, and then he'd get in, he'd play these top 40 hits for you for 3 hours, Big Al, your radio pal. Then he would go home, and they did things like they had to close the curtains so that people couldn't look in and all this kind of stuff. And of course they didn't, but it was just kind of funny.
And again, it's radio, so you can create the scene and let the listener really interpret it as they will.
Yeah, it was a kind of a theater thing, and in a bottom rung of the ladder of entertainment maybe. But nonetheless, it was some people trying to be creative, doing their thing. They weren't hurting anybody. They had some juices going, and so they would do their thing. We used to, on the weekends, we used to have a horror show, a scary Dracula kind of, I guess, an early version of science fiction, but. On the weekends, we used to have a show with Frankenstein, and Bert Powley was his real name, Bert Powley, and but he did this thing called Frankenstein, and they put a little echo in the microphone, and he'd do this kind of a vampire thing, and he'd play these scary songs, and then around Halloween they'd do this thing where he'd be in a coffin, and he'd broadcast his show from a coffin, and you know, it was, if you don't drive carefully this holiday season, you know, this is what you'll look like, and blah, the gray makeup on him and the whole thing. But yeah, they did little shticks like that for the newscasts. I actually started in news.
And what year was that, Steve?
1960, well, I graduated in 62 from North, so I was actually on the radio a year before I got out of school. So it would have been in the mid-61, 61, the summer of 61, and I started with, the news director was Max Rauer, and Max Rauer was a veteran newsman even in the 60s. He was a Korean War veteran, had been a prisoner of war. He just had a real colorful background. He was the voice of Drake Sports. He was just a fantastic speaker. Jim Duncan from Drake, Max Rauer, these type of people were the rocks for me, you know, in my foundation. They were the rock that I built my cornerstone on. As you know, I watched these people and I went, ooh, you know, this is class. You know, they had something going. But we worked in the newsroom. I mean, they weren't about fun. Don't get me wrong. When these people had fun, they had fun. But when they were on the air, it was business. And there was a persona. They kind of went into this realm, you know, this personal, spiritual thing. I don't know. It was just like they just wanted to be good. They wanted to be a professional. They wanted to do. They were again this bottom rung of acting maybe, but they were entertainers. They did their thing, and they took on this air. And so anyway, but when I first came in, of course, you remember we had the old teletypes that used to go teka, 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 and they would just literally sit there, and there was this typewriter that would just, and there were like 2 or 3 of them. There was Associated Press, there was United Press International, maybe there was another machine of some independent, and they would just sit there and clack, 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 clack. I mean, the noise was, they had cowls. They had cowls put over them to kind of make them silent, but you could still hear this clackety, clackety, clackety noise of this stories pounding out. And it was this ribbon that was, it was a bluish, purplish ink. And if you grabbed the story too soon, it would like come off in your thumbs. But when I first
changing the ribbon was always
changing the ribbon
yeah.
was a nightmare, just an absolute nightmare, because you had to hurry and you had to pick a time when there wasn't a story coming across and everything else. But when I first started, like I say, it was in the news, and we had a format for the news where the music would end, and then you had this prepared production number to get you into the news. And something, you know, like, when music stops, news begins on KSO. KSO, and I don't know if they called it Alert Central News or Action Central News or whatever the cliche was, the thing they did. But we used to have echo button, and then we had a telegrapher's key, which was just like a telegrapher's key, like they would send code with, except the engineers had set it so that it would just go over and over. It didn't do dots and dashes like a telegrapher's key would. You just pushed it and it would go and you'd hit the button and go Saigon, and then you'd read this story. So you were actually doing things with both hands while you were reading this copy. And so you had to, it was a bit of a timing, you know, you had to get it all down. And good afternoon, Steve Gibbons, KSO News, Saigon, you know, and then you'd read the first story. And then, you know, after you'd read the news stories, you'd, you know, Eye on the Sky, Alert Central Weather is next. And then they'd go to a commercial for the sponsor. And then when you came back out, you went from the echo button to a filter button on your microphone, which made you sound like, you know, it made it sound a little different. And then you would read the Alert Center's Eye in the Sky weather forecast or whatever it was called for whoever. And then you'd read the weather, and then back to the regular mic and say, this has been the latest news, next news as warranted on KSO. This is Steve Gibbons, you know, or whatever your close was. And then boom, the announcer would yell, hey everybody, it's back to the, you know, and he'd do his racks and racks of moldy wax or whatever his thing was, and he'd be off and running, and the pace was such that the ball was always dribbling. There was always something going on, you know. There's always something going here, even in the news. So.
Well, you're your own sound effects man.
Yeah, you were your own sound effects man, did your thing. You got the weather, you got the news, you ripped all the stories, you put them in order, you got them, you know, you had a certain way that the news director, Max Rauer, wanted you to do it. So, yeah, it was
real what I guess I've come to know, and as a listener come to know as AM radio in the 60s. It was that rapid fire, everything's going, as you say, the ball's always dribbling.
Yeah.
You know, to me, I'm always thinking there are 6 balls in the air at any one time. Do you suppose that was the time? You know, because so many things were going on in the world that were so heavy. Did they need some level of diversion? I mean, this was really the entertainment because you could take your mind off of some of the things in the world with, you know, the Big Al persona. You know, this sort of a thing. Is this why it may have resonated around here? Or? Pretty sociological type question, I know, but
I think it's pretty simple when it's boiled down, and I don't know what the base ingredients are, maybe to the next person, but to me, the base elements of radio in the 50s and 60s, if you follow radio from its creation, which was an entertainment medium, and actually, I think in some cities, radio might have been in step with the movie industry at one time. You had your big stars on the radios in the major markets. You had your big stars on movies. They went into more homes on the radio, And so it was to the Bob Hope and Bing Crosby and Jack Benny, it was to their advantage to try to get a Texaco radio hour or a Ivory Soap theater, or the Chrysler Corporation presents, it was to their advantage to do that. So radio did that. Well, then, and I'm not sure exactly if there was a situation here monetarily where it became impossible for the radio stations to keep doing this, as prices and material and union costs and who knows what elements came into play. But the local stations found that I think that they could play recorded dance music. And the big bands helped out there because they would have band hours and live broadcasts from local hotel ballrooms. And again, the major markets led the way with the Glenn Millers and the Benny Goodmans and the Tommy Dorseys and et cetera, et cetera. And then the disc came along, and, it's sort of like, you're kind of adding, like shuffling all these elements together. And I think that all brought radio up to where they said, well, gee, we can hire a popular entertainer to play discs, and we can do that cheaper than to pay a union band. And again, I'm not putting down unions, I'm just stating what I think is where the circumstances. It's easier to have a guy in a room with an engineer over there playing the records and the personality over here talking, the talk to whoever's listening. And I think that all just kept working its way back and forth like you're sifting for gold in a scree there down by the creek, looking for gold nuggets. I think you just keep shaking the chaff out until pretty soon you got to the fact that then they did away with the engineer over there, and then the disc jockey was born. Well, the disc jockey had his own 45s and then you get into that kind of a thing. So I think that's how kind of it all worked its way down from the big heydays until the local radio station said, gee, I can't afford all this, but gee, I can put a 19-year-old kid in there who sounds like he's on caffeine, wired on caffeine, to play these hip-hop records. Mm-hmm. And so, then you had, and you had what do I say here? Like jazz music led to a little bit faster music. The big bands kind of made it, you had a little more palatable to the audiences, a wider selection of audiences, big bands. Then the big bands kind of gave away to the singers, and the singers kind of gave away to another type of singer. And so you had the music changing, you had radio kind of changing, you had you had a World War, you had a Korean War or conflicts, whatever your history book says. And so you had all this thing going on. Men coming back from Europe looking for jobs. You had a little faster pace. Women got out in the workforce, and all these things. People were getting up in the morning, going to work, and you needed somebody to do the news, somebody to do the weather, and you kind of mix this Americana all in there together. And radio kind of played a pretty, I think, important role in there. And you got the personalities, you got the Wolfman Jacks, and you got these people that started coming along and made a niche for themselves. Machine Gun Kelly, True Dawn Blue, some of these people that I worked with in other markets, they all gravitated out. Here in Des Moines, we had McKinnon brothers. Don McKinnon went on to California and became a large personality. That if you talk to people like Don Imus, who's still on the air at WFAN in New York, he will tell you he listened to Don McKinnon. Well, Don McKinnon started here at KIOA. Doug McKinnon, his brother, was on the air. Don was working at the airport, and he said, gee, I can do what you're doing, Doug. And so he came on, and they used to do bits together. And then pretty soon they were on the same radio station together. And they're both nuts. I mean, they're just crazy personalities off the wall. And You can go on the internet right now and find Don McKinnon sites where people have recorded old KFAB or W, whatever that station was out in California. Well, he's actually been enshrined on the internet now. So it's like he's gone from Des Moines at the airport to KIOA to the internet. I mean, you know, it's amazing. So there's actually people out there who still remembered, like Wolfman Jack,
Sure.
but not as famous maybe, but even so, a very big personality. And
Because it is all the people.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
the thing about broadcasting that I
Yeah.
find is, you know, and having done it to a much less great degree, obviously, but you're coming into people's homes, you're
Yeah.
part of their lives, you're a part of the private moment in the car on the way to work.
Mhm.
That's a huge thing, and I want to get back to that, but I don't want to lose sight of the Gibbons chronology. You did news at KSO for how long?
Oh,
And then where?
I was in, I suppose I did news for maybe, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 months, I don't know. And then they needed, somebody was sick or somebody couldn't make it to their shift on the weekend. So I went in and did a music show after I did the news. And I'd already been practicing in this buddy's attic for a year and a half, 2 years before I ever got into the business. So I kind of thought I knew what I wanted to be and how I wanted to pace myself. So I had a little image that I wanted to try to create. So I did that. And of course, being a hometown boy and going to North High and blah, 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 of course helped because I could drop a lot of names and say hi to my buddies, and I was on the radio, and that was kind of cool. And because I was still in high school at that time, I graduated in January, so that was kind of neat. But yeah,
Well, especially with the number of high school kids listening to KSO at that time.
yeah, because you
Yeah,
had two
that's huge.
choices. You had KSO and KIOA,
Yeah.
and yeah, it was really great. But I stayed in music then. And kind of left the news thing behind. And then KSO moved physically out to out on Broadway, which at the time in '62 was pretty much countryside. And I stayed with them for, I suppose, about a year out there. And then I went to work for WHO. And lasted there for about a year and a half, and then they had an opening in the TV department, and as a cameraman, audio man kind of thing, which would have led to being a TV director, a program director, so TV director. So I went into that and just worked weekends in WHO radio and did vacation stuff and that kind of stuff. Mike Hoyer had an all-night show on WHO at the time, country music thing, and so I would cover for him when he was gone, and just did little fill-ins and stuff, nothing really big. Tried to get into the TV angle of it, and really enjoyed that, and got to work with Dwayne Ellett and all those guys that were on the air at the time. Maury Miller, who had the movie matinee guy in the old movie matinee days, and
Dialing for dollars.
yeah, dialing for dollars and doing all that, and of course Don Warren, and I can't think of all the men that I worked with, but just kind of absorbed, again, some of their, idiosyncrasies and some of their ways of doing things, and just continued being a sponge, I guess, trying to absorb all this stuff. But stayed there at HO for about 3.5 years, and TV and radio, and then went over to KRNT television, and thought that I was done with radio, and stayed in the TV end of it. Started directing weekend shows with Bill Riley and a bunch of people that were over there on the weekends doing zoo shows and Talon Sprouts and this type of stuff. And then had somebody say they needed a part-time announcer up on KRNT radio. So I said, well, okay, I suppose I can do that too. And so
Common ownership, common building at
yes,
that time.
yeah. And so KRNT AM and KRNT TV, and then actually there was a KRNT FM, which beget KRNQ, and then that became Q102, and now is Star. So that's kind of the evolution there. KRNT TV and radio, the FCC and its questionable wisdom over the years, one of the things they decided was that they thought that they needed to break up all the AM, FM, TV newspaper conglomerates. And since we were owned by Kohl's Communications, the same people that owned the TV station, even though it was a different brother, one brother owned the TV, one brother owned the newspaper, they got scared, and so they sold the radio station off to a company out of Topeka, Kansas. Stauffer Communications bought KRNT AM and FM, and then the television station later went on its own. Somebody had to change the call letters, so they decided to make it the TV station, so they became KCCI. KRNT radio stayed the same, and KRNT FM became Q102, which became Star. So that's kind of what that all happened. I left then just before the Stauffer people bought it. Had a job offer in Minneapolis, so I went up there, and then went out to Denver.
Now, he's in the business then, Steve?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Then I went down to Dallas, staying in radio, and then I had a situation where a parent died and the other parent wasn't very well. About that time, the morning man that was on KRNT, they decided they wanted to change morning man. So they called me, and again, just as things happen, it appeared it was a good time for me to come back to Des Moines from Dallas, even though I hated leaving Dallas and hating leaving the major markets. But I came back in 78 and stayed at KRNT ever since 78. So
Yeah, that was a big deal. I mean, I remember the publicity campaign and the
Yeah,
whole bit.
yeah.
I mean, that was a huge deal.
yeah, it's amazing though, and I never ever forgot this. It's amazing how when I left KRNT in 70, it was around the Christmas I think of 72. When I left in the Christmas of 72 and went to Minneapolis, worked up there, had a great time, went out, got a job offer from Denver radio station, went out there and worked with a couple of local guys, Hal Moore, Charlie Martin, at KHOW in Denver, which was a big station then at the time. Stayed out there, then they decided, the people that owned Doubleday Broadcasting that owned KHOW decided they wanted to do the same thing in San Antonio, so I went down to San Antonio and worked at Kite, K-I-T-E in San Antonio for about a year, and then they decided that what they were doing in Denver wouldn't work in San Antonio. Duh. Mainly because the population was a little different. The infrastructure, did you ever look at that? Maybe that would have been a little different. Denver, San Antonio. So anyway, I wandered up to Dallas and went to work with Peter McLean and Art Jones and some Des Moines guys that were in Dallas. A good friend, John Copeland, Tom Page, who was from Coil in Omaha in its heyday. He's died now, dead now, but Tom Page just had kind of a Des Moines feel to it. Went up there and worked, just grabbed the overnight show, and then the overnight guy, the morning man, decided he didn't want to work in Dallas, so he just called in one day and said, I won't be there like that. And so McLean threw me in there just as kind of, I don't know, I guess cannon fodder. Said, here, you go do mornings. And here I was doing mornings in Dallas, and I was like, wow, I'm in the Dallas radio market, and I don't have any idea what I'm going to do. So it's like I didn't sleep that night. It was like acid indigestion beyond belief. And so when it came time for me to go on the air on this radio station, I was like just totally freaking out. It was like really, really stressful. But after about 3 months, I just kind of looked around. I said, gee, nobody's shot me. Nobody's called in and said you stink. I'm okay. I'll be okay.
This
But,
might work.
This might work.
Yeah.
But then, like I say, on the real on the life side, life going on side, because radio really isn't life. It's kind of like I said, pretend or show business. Then I had a parent pass away suddenly, and another parent that had Parkinson's, and it was he was struggling, and my dad, and so I came back, and then the station called me and asked me if I'd come back, and it was just like, wow. So I came back.
Everything for a purpose.
Yeah, it really was. It was like somebody was watching out.
Yeah.
The timing was unbelievably great. I mean, here I was, at the peak of my career in Dallas,
Yeah.
but and having a ball and making friends and going to all the conventions and being able to say, I work in Dallas.
So now it's 24 years.
Yeah.
Mornings at KRNT.
Yeah, and then to came back here, and it's been a long time, and it's.
Did you expect
still
that when you
amazing.
came back at that time in '78?
Yeah.
Did you think, all right, 24 years from now,
Well,
I'm going to be doing mornings at KRNT?
I came back right to be at KRNT, but I guess when I came back, I kind of thought maybe I was going to get back into TV again. I kind of thought I wanted to get back into TV again because I had done a couple of TV shows on the way through. I did a weekly show, weekend show out in Colorado, out there for an independent, which was owned by the Tribune, WGN people. And then when I went down to Dallas, I did kind of a weekend, around town kind of thing on an independent television station down there that was really well accepted. And we were able to pull in some personalities that were visiting Dallas and get them involved in cooking or gardening or whatever the thing was that we were doing that weekend. And we had, there was 3 or 4 of us that had little niches that we did this kind of weekend show. And it was fun. It was fun. We pull in, if there was a band in town, some lead singer or something, and he'd give us a recipe that he'd prepared on the road for the band, or whatever the case might be, something like that. So we had fun with, we could put them in a different setting where they didn't have to maybe strum a guitar or sing or whatever, and do that with them. And most of the time they really enjoyed it. I mean, it was kind of their left side, right side of their brain. They get to talk about another part of their brain. But anyway, we did that. And then I came back here and I thought, well, I'll try and do something like that here. And had several talks with some people here in the Des Moines area about doing something like that, but it just never quite came to fruition. It just never happened. So I don't know. And then one day leads to another, and pretty soon it's another week, and it's a month, and it's a year, and after a while it's 24 years. So here we are. But I enjoyed. I don't know if you want to include this or not, but I was at a movie the other night, and it was like. This baseball, this young man had wanted to be a baseball player, but his dad discouraged him from being a baseball player. And so he ended up being a coach in this small Texas town. And the kids put it to him, well, if we win a championship, will you try out for the Texas Rangers or some team in Texas? And so he said, sure. Maybe it was the Astros, I don't know. But anyway, he went and tried out, and he actually got the job as a pitcher in the minor league. And I enjoyed one line in this movie as another player who had come into the minor league much younger, and then he as a pitcher came in as an older adult, and they walked into the dressing room, and you could hear their shoes clicking on the floor, their spikes on the tile floor in this small AAA or maybe AA team in Texas, and he says they were both complaining. They were both complaining about something, and he says, "Yeah, but you know what?" He says, "We get to do something that nobody else gets to do." And he says, "What's that?" He says, "We get to play baseball today." And I thought, geez, that's a great line for radio. Because no matter how much you complain, or the studio's hot, or I don't like this song, or anything else, I get to play radio today. And I guess I've never forgotten. I mean, I did forget it, but that movie kind of brought it back. And so I get to play radio today. So when you walk in the back door, if you're going into a radio or TV station, no matter how much you complain, and we tend to be a callous group. I mean, radio people are so vindictive and acidic and oh man, we're so big on that kind of stuff. But we give each other no quarter. But I get to be in radio today. I get to be on the radio today. So anyway, that kind of put it all in perspective for me.
Well, and It does, because, and I was listening as I was driving down up in Waverly, where I'm living now. I used to live in Marshall County. I can't get the station very often, so I was
Yeah.
listening as I'm coming down, and, the format has changed of the station more than a time or two.
Yeah.
The ownership has changed everything. You've been now the constant, though, for 28 years.
Yeah.
The frequency. Give me a quick
crazy.
view, the best as you can recall. When you came, what was KRNT doing? Who were they trying to reach? And how did that evolve to where it is now?
When I came back,
It was adult contemporary, wasn't it?
it was right, adult
Yeah.
contemporary, and you got to remember radio formats. There used to be 5, maybe 6. Now there's probably 16. There was country, which when I first started was actually called country western, C&W, but now that's kind of an insult, I guess. But now they call it country. And there was middle of the road, and there was full service. There was religious, and then there was public radio. And that was about it. You then got into the top 40 stations that came along, and if you do this kind of a tree, then each becomes something else, or another branch sprouts out. KRNT, the folks of KRNT, it was a CBS station. When I first started here in the 60s, we carried all the CBS programming, every little 5-minute vignette, the Arthur Godfrey show, anything that CBS sent down the line. The management at the time took it and aired it either live or in a delayed broadcast kind of thing. And then over the years, this dinosaur mentality thing kind of evolved into, well, we'll just take a few things that we think apply to our audience, and then you keep whittling and whittling and whittling, and pretty soon it was down to just sports and the news, and then a few boutique items like the Charles Osgoods and the weekend news shows, Meet the Press, and some of that kind of stuff. And then the whittling continued, and it became a little less of that. I think the thrust or the audience for KRNT has always been 50 plus. I don't know of a time. Adult contemporary, the profile of the adult contemporary person maybe has changed. The silhouette may have changed, the demographics may have changed, but I think it's always been a 50 plus audience. As my little way of explaining this whenever I go to a school or somewhere is that, for the most part, a radio station is like a rock in a stream. And as your listeners come by, this leaf, if you will, drifting by, falls into this area, this rock makes ripples out. And so as you're a leaf drifting along here down this down this stream of life, you tend to go by this radio station. And if you're a 16-year-old and you're coming in, or a 12-year-old, and you came into KSO and KIOA when I was, in the 50s, that radio station kind of appealed to you, and you kind of drifted along with them. And then as you got further on down the stream, you found more rocks and different kinds of music. And then as life has moved along, the stream got bigger, and the world gets smaller, and there's more rocks out there. But we all kind of gravitate toward the music that made us feel comfortable. When I worked in dance clubs, they were popular, the discos. I always found that I had great success if I wanted to get the men to dance. Usually a man will sit in with his hands crossed. It reminds you of like a school gymnasium. You got the guys over here and the girls over here. Now this is my era, by the way. I'm not talking about today, which things are a little different. But you had the guys on one side of the room and the girls on the other. And after a guy had enough beers, maybe he'd get out and dance. But I always found that if I would play an artist that a guy was familiar with, then like, if you played something that they could, it was kind of a man song, they'd come out and dance a little bit. So I always had a lot of success in the discos by playing maybe a song that was not quite disco. It was more of a rock song that the guy could feel comfortable with to get back out there. So, but we all have comfort zones in our radio stations, and there's nothing wrong with that. But for the people that listen to KRNT, I guess we're just trying to be a comfort zone without too much of the the edgy music. We feature little boutique shows, jazz. We even have I guess we like a religious type Sunday morning area where you feel comfortable with that, with the hymn times and the Dr. Billy Graham's and that kind of show. We have a couple of churches locally that send us their sermons down, and they have half-hour shows with that. So we have a little area there. We have Cubs baseball, Chicago Cubs baseball, so people that feel comfortable with baseball on the radio can do that. I guess it's just a kind of like a comfort food or a comfort zone on the radio. There's nothing really in your face about the announcers. Mostly it's current time, temperature, things that are going on in our town. And like I say, the staples, Frank Sinatra, Nat King Cole, Peggy Lee, Ella Fitzgerald, this kind of stuff. We get into a little Manhattan Transfer to do that kind of harmony. Mills Brothers, Four Tops would not be something that we would play, but we could play the Four Freshmen. We can play the Brothers Four, but we couldn't maybe play the Drifters. We do harmonics, but we don't necessarily get into the KIOA kind of harmonics where they go into some of the Motown type stuff. But we can play, Johnny Mathis or something in that area. So
it seems
it's just a 50-plus kind of thing. It's an acquired taste.
But it's what radio used to be up and down the line. And when I was first starting 20 years ago in radio, we wanted to get away from block programming.
Yeah.
Well, to me, this is to some degree block, where Sunday morning you're going to find a certain thing.
Yes.
At other times the Cubs are there. The information that you need to get from point A to point B is still going to be there, and it's been that way for KRNT since the 30s.
Yes.
Really.
Yeah. Yeah. KRNT signed on the air St. Patrick's Day, March 17th. In 1935, and they actually shared the same frequency with KSO. Right. One would be on for half the day, and then they'd sign off, and then the other one would sign on. And at one time, I had actual photos of the studios where they did this, and it was kind of interesting because it was built in the round, and on this side were the studios for one station, and on this side was the other. And it was kind of interesting the way that the engineers put it all together. Of course, equipment was much larger then, tubes, and you needed coils to cool things. You needed running water to cool transmitters. It was big fans to stir the air up in the transmitters. And I mean, literally, when KSO was out on Broadway, and they had these humongous RCA transmitters next to the room where you were broadcasting, you could walk by a woman or a man with long hair, a woman with long hair, and your hair would just kind of come up and go to the transmitter door. It's like, zzz. So it was
and some improvements, I suppose.
Yeah, you could take fluorescent lights, just take the bulb and just hold it in the room and it would light up because there was enough RF floating around in the room that it would activate the little phosphorus in the tube. So we always used to joke about the fact that probably none of us would be able to have children because we were working on these giant transmitters bombarding our bodies with protons and
I never worked at a station where the transmitter was right next to the studio. It was always the STL, but
Yeah,
I never heard about the fluorescent light.
Yeah,
That's
oh yeah,
great.
you take the
That is
bulb and just
great.
hold it out, and it was a big deal when you had visitors. Hey, watch the, in fact, when I think about it, it was sort of like Star Wars before there was ever a Star Wars.
lightsaber.
Yeah, you could turn the lights off and hold this thing up, and it would just, zzz, zzz, zzz. I never thought about that. We're kind of early Jedi Knights there with the radio. But anyway.
Now, obviously, I've got all day and a bunch of people, so you tell me when you're tired of talking. But there was something that I recall, something that's always intrigued me about broadcasting, is that the audience is just so, I'll say possessive, and I mean that in a good way, of the stations, of the formats, of the people. I mean, it's just amazing. And when I say to students, try to convey it to them, they don't understand it until maybe they go work at a TV station and the calls come in about somebody's hairstyle or necktie or whatever. Now, I recall there was a period a few years ago where the station, KRNT, decided they wanted no live announcers.
Right.
And that would have meant that you would have worked behind the scenes and et cetera, if I'm remembering the story correctly, and the public was not pleased with that. Do you mind sharing that? Because to me it just said, the public is saying, this is important to us. And that had to make you personally feel pretty good about what you had
it
done
was
here.
it was a very humbling experience. It was first of all, to be called in and told that you were going to be let go at the end of the month was a frightening experience, and I said my goodbyes on the air, and I was done. I mean, was fired. I mean, I had no job after the end of the month, and so I was looking for other stations and contacting old comrades and getting back into that thing again. I hadn't looked for a job for so long, and I thought, well, okay, here we go. And but the letters started coming in, and they ended up getting like 500 letters or something from people and groups and everything else that said, this is our kind of programming. We enjoy this kind of laid back, non-abrasive programming that he does here. So leave him alone. So they called me back and said, maybe we made a mistake. So yeah, it was a very humbling experience just to see all those letters in those boxes, and it's just I never caused that kind of mail response before, and it was to see that kind of thing. It's just like, I mean, some people, like stars, they see it all the time, but sitting here in Des Moines, Iowa, not trying to be a star, just doing my thing, and waiting to win the Powerball jackpot, I'm just, just to see all these letters, it's like, and you start going through these, and these names, all of a sudden, it's like you can't thank everybody. So, I mean, I did, but it had to be a kind of a broad stroke thank you. I mean, I never thought about it. I suppose I could have started reading names and just kept reading names till I ran out, but I kept those letters for the longest time. For the longest time, kept those letters, and it was really something. But yeah, the audience is, and just as quick as that, if after I was welcomed back, and and given the best parts of the chicken, and told to sit at the head of the table, and have an extra helping of pie, we're glad you're back. At the same time, it was like 2 weeks later, I did something that I thought was funny that a bunch of people didn't. So they immediately, what do you get this guy back for? He stinks, and who brought him back in the house? Let him sleep outside in the bunkhouse. But
A fickle audience, perhaps.
yeah, they are just as quick to vote, thumbs up or thumbs down. So you're either on the plank or off the plank. But
It was 90, do you remember the year? 5, 6?
Yeah, 19. I tried to forget it. I tried to wipe it out of my mind.
Yeah. Bring it up, but
what was it? 94, 95, somewhere along in there.
The reason that I wanted to ask that is, in reading things of the past, and Bill Riley doing the Hey Bob show and 10,000 kids showing up, and the letters that certain contests would generate. And there are some people who would like to put that in a little box and say, well, that was back then. But to, in essence, see it replicated to me personally,
in a smaller degree.
Sure,
yeah,
sure,
yeah.
but in a very direct, focused way. I cannot imagine how meaningful that must have been.
There, I think, I mean, I know what you're getting at. I think even though you're talking about the same industry and the same medium and all that, I think we're getting into an apples and bananas kind of thing there, where you're trying to mix what radio used to be with what it is now. Radio, and again, I hearken back to something I said earlier, and I don't mean this, and I'm not pointing fingers, I'm not accusing, I'm just kind of making an observation, 55-year-old guy looking at this since he was 16. Radio used to be a little more of an entertainment medium than it is now. I'm afraid now it's kind of slipped into a appliance slash background kind of thing where, and again, I had to be careful how I phrase this because it's up for argument, I suppose, in different cities with different people, but it used to be that, you'd sit down and you would stop and listen to Amos and Andy, or you would sit down and stop and listen to Bob Hope or whatever. Now, with everybody's lifestyles being so hectic and a lot of things pulling at you at the same time, you got the kids, the school, work, dad, mom, whatever, parents in a nursing home, whatever that's going on, lawn needs mowing, the dog, whatever. Radio's become kind of a background thing, and I think people listen in snippets where they maybe tune in and out of you. We all still have favorite songs. We all still have voices that we think are appealing. Some voices irritate us. Some voices are appealing. We all have a program, a news program, or a health program, or a weather program, or something that we want to listen to or view. Either one. But I don't know if people sit down and give radio. I think it's sort of like sitting there on the counter in the kitchen, like the toaster, or in the bathroom like the shaver, wherever you happen to listen. In the car, you've got AM, FM, cassettes, CDs, MP3s, you've got XM radio out of the satellites, cell phones, beepers, pagers.
And I think TV has become that way too, where people don't really watch TV anymore. They're doing 3 other things. It's kind of hit that same evolutionary thing.
It's funny you should mention that, because I think that I've seen that already in the older demographics, because I can attest to the fact that I go to my parents' or grandparents' house, they have the TV on, but it's like they're not really watching. It's like it's in the background. It's almost like it's company or some kind of drone, some kind of noise going on. That's kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting, and I don't know if as my generation gets older and moves toward the nursing homes or whatever, if that's something that. But I have friends who have parents, and I have parents that were in nursing homes. And if you go into the nursing homes, it's like it's just kind of sitting there like Pavlov's dog or something, just kind of, that's what's on. I don't know.
Well, I see that with 18-year-olds, and they just slack-jawed and the eyes are glued to the screen, and you just wonder if anything's coming in, which is a great concern, but that's.
Like vast wasteland television. Oh, well, let's not talk about TV.
Yeah, that's not good.
Let's not throw that word around. We're talking about radio.
By God.
RADIO.
What is it that still gets you up in the morning to do this? Now, did Bill tell me, are you doing both afternoon drives, or how does that work? I know the morning is live, because I could tell.
Yep. I do a split shift on KRNT. Monday through Saturday, I do a morning show. And then in the afternoon, Monday through Friday, I do a 3-hour music show. The beauty and the beast, if you will, of the industry has been computer chips. And digitalized music reproduction. In the beginning, and I don't know how many people care, but in the beginning, your first digital recordings, you could put a needle on a vinyl, and you could put a laser beam on a CD, and there was a warmth missing on the CD in the beginning. Now they've somehow enhanced the CD. So that it sounds a little warmer at times. But anyway, the radio industry has progressed to the point where the computers that we have in our studio, and I have 3 of them, now can actually talk to each other and understand what I want. To them, it's just ones and twos and X's and ones and zeros. And to me, though, it's a text. So as I'm sitting in there, I tell it I want, CBS News, and then I want a jingle, and then I want a song, and then I want to talk. Well, that I give it all numbers, and so it just sees elements.
Yep.
It doesn't care what I'm doing or how long it lasts. So I can actually go in, and where I'm supposed to talk, I can actually pre-record that element and have it in waiting, and the computer just pulls it out of the hard drive and just shuffles it together. So the advantage to that is that I can do a live morning show, but then if it's a nice afternoon and I've got other business, or if I just want to take off an afternoon, I can pre-record my show at, say, 2 o'clock for playback from 3 till 6. It takes me about an hour to do a 3-hour show. Again, still giving it the same elements, still giving it the same input, still giving it the same professionalism that I'd do if I was live. It's just that there's, that I just tend to just do it on a pre-recorded basis so that I don't actually have to be there. And then I'm free to, like I say, go to a meeting or go play golf or be, wherever I want to be.
And it's that live feel, but it's...
Right, but it is a
and it's still
pre-recorded,
local,
right,
at least,
right.
Yeah.
Good.
I'm just going to...
We brought him in there.
Well, and I guess that's the thing that did interest me, because I read Herb's book, and I looked at an interview that had been done of Herb a few years back, obviously.
What a man,
And-
what a colorful, well-traveled, well-versed man. Jeez.
And what was it? Now, were you program director at the time at the station? So Herb gets, well, I feel dumped. I mean, I don't know what the phraseology is, but I mean, essentially he's told you're not welcome at WHO anymore. We'd rather run canned programming. How did it come up that it occurred to you, Herb Plambeck still has something to say, and we want to give him the platform?
Yeah.
How does that come up in your mind as a program director, that this is a good idea, or with any of these people that you've just cited?
Yeah. There was a situation where, I mean, it was, here's this worldwide known name. You go to Russia and they know Herb Plambeck. I mean, you go to Ireland and they ask him farming questions. I mean, you go to India and they know Herb Plambeck. I mean, it's like, the president would call Herb Plambeck to ask him questions about farming. And here I was, this guy was in Des Moines on the beach. I mean, it was like, he's available, Zzz, it's like, put the 2 wires together here. And so I called him and I said, I don't have anything, Herb, I'm not a farm station, but could you come on and just talk about lawns and gardening and flowers and stuff? Because I knew he was a member of the men's gardening group. And
he had done that on WHO on Saturday mornings for a short time.
Right,
for some
right.
time.
And I mean, I felt so, I had my hat in my hand. I felt so like I was knocking on the stage door, back door there. Just, and asking if he could come over and just do this maybe a 15-minute a week home and gardening and type show. And he said, "Oh, I'd love to," And so he came over. Of course, I'd met Herb when I was at HO. And met him over there, and what a neat guy. I mean, geez, just he knew so much about everything, and it had to do with gardening, farming, and that kind of stuff. But
and he did that show up until when?
Well,
not long before he
not
passed.
long before he died. Yeah. He's just a super guy. I had an opportunity to help him move when he left his home over off of Polk Boulevard. I helped him move to the Scottish Rite Temple's apartment complex on Center. And, you know, I have a few awards and I have a few little plaques, and I'm proud of them, and I don't mean to belittle them. I shouldn't say it that way. I have plaques that groups and organizations have given me over the years for things I've contributed and my time spent and what have you, and I'm very appreciative of those. Here's a person that had so many plaques and awards and condemnation, you know, just you name it. He had all these things, honorary degrees from colleges in every language you could think of on the wall. I mean, you know, it looked like the UN waiting room. I mean, it was like the green room at the UN. It was just unbelievable, the amount of tapestry this man had on the air from all these different organizations. And I have no idea where that stuff went. I know when he moved, he couldn't take it. I don't know where it went. I really don't. All that stuff is, who knows? He took a few favorite pieces to the apartment, but yeah,
Well,
he was just a neat guy.
what other ones? You mentioned the jazz show?
Well, yeah, George Fletcher, who was locally did a show called The Jazz Man, and he dealt with, you know, the trials and tribulations of jazz that swung over from ragtime, and from the marches to the ragtime to the jazz, and as that whole industry evolved, and the first jazz recordings came along in the teens, and then, you know, we got into the Louis Armstrongs and the all those people that came up in that time period. I can't think of all the names right now. But the jazzman George Fletcher actually started out in California and started archiving some of these people in photographs. And he became so well known at it that the Smithsonian has his work up there to this day. George Fletcher gets the credit for a lot of these photographs at the Smithsonian, but because he took pictures of some of these guys in the 40s before they passed away. Because you know, when they first started, nobody wanted to touch. Not a lot of labels. A lot of the labels didn't want to touch the black artists. Didn't think they'd sell. Blah blah blah. You know, the mindset at that time. So George went in and photographed a lot of these men who were old, and I mean, you know, he did that. So anyway, but and then he was on the beach. He ended up on the beach here in Des Moines, and so I said, well, hey, there again, you know, here's George Fletcher. So he came on board over here and worked with us, and I can see his yellow Carmen Ghia, Volkswagen Carmen Ghia, is a yellow Carmen Ghia pulling in the parking lot. It was before I think yellow was ever popular, and it said Bix lives on the license plate. So that was his license plate, Bix lives. I don't know whatever happened to that license plate either, but probably be a real collector's item along the Mississippi River.
Probably a waiting list for it.
Yeah,
From folks
yeah.
out there. Now, does Hymn Time live here now?
And Hymn Time, the longest continuous running religious show, hymn show, type show, music show, is on KRNT. Now the name is shared now with our sister station, Light, 104.1, and it's hosted by a local minister. But yeah, Hymn Time started on KSO or KRNT. In like I say, it's been the longest running continuous Sunday morning hymn show. The time moved, and boy, you talk about letters. I got letters when that moved, and Chuck Offenberger even jumped on that one with both feet. He really stirred up the hornet's nest. But yeah, in fact, AE canceled their advertising. They had advertised on the show for like 45 years, and we moved it. And man, oh man, the cottage cheese hit the fan. Jeez.
And that's longest running continuous hymn program in
that hymn
country,
type.
Iowa, or
Well, I can say in Iowa. I can for sure say Des Moines. I'm pretty sure I'll say Iowa.
Yeah.
I don't know about anything beyond that, but definitely the longest running hymn type show in Des Moines, Hymn Time. But sponsored by 100 years by AE, and then we moved it and they canceled. So That got me in a real lot of hot water with the listeners. Gee, and Chuck Offenberger, that's my favorite show. I listen every Sunday.
Yeah. Oh, I remember that. And you don't want to be on the wrong end of somebody buying ink by the barrel or who holds a microphone.
Yeah. And of course, I used to tease Chuck unmercifully when he was in Des Moines. In fact, we had a character on the show called Chuck Office Furniture, which was a takeoff on Chuck Offenberger. It was the Chuck Office Furniture, and this guy was kind of a bumbling reporter type, and we used to make fun of him about that. But anyway, and he was good. He was good humored about it. So
I started asking a minute ago, and then I then added a second question about what it is you do on a daily basis. And so I want to get back to that. I asked the poor question.
Yeah.
So what is it now after 40 years in radio, 40 plus, that you still say, I want to go down to Locust Street every morning?
I want to get up at 4 o'clock, Monday through Friday, and talk into a microphone and pretend like somebody is out there listening and cares. I don't know, maybe it's the fear of real work, maybe it's, I don't know. That's a smart aleck remark. I don't know. I do know. It's like I said earlier. I get to go in. I'm on the radio. I mean, gee, Manili, if that's what you want to do, it's like a bricklayer. I get to build a wall today. It'll be there after I'm gone. That kind of thing. Or I'm a doctor, or I'm a professor. I get to teach people with something. I get to put something in their brain they'll keep for the rest of their life, or pass on. I mean, that kind of a thing. So it's really pretty simple. It's not really glorified. It's not the money. It's not the notoriety. It's the little bennies that you get. It's the little shiver you get when you know that you're on the radio. It's I don't know. It's just this kind of and depending on what market you're in, of course, and depending on the person who answers the question, it's just a, I don't know. One time I tried to categorize. I tried to look like I was up above all the industry here, up above the radio, and I tried to figure out if there was a common thread or a denominator here between all of us. Like, were we all abused as children, or were we all ignored as children, or were we all babied as children, or did we have doting grandparents, or did we have doting parents, or were we mama's boys, or were we daddy's? I tried to figure out what kind of a person, were we all sarcastic, evil people from, but and the answer was kind of yes, we're all those things. But I don't know. I think it's just a little bit of everything. But the alarm goes off at 4 o'clock, 4:15, depending, and maybe I hit the snooze alarm, maybe I don't. Maybe I wake up with a good attitude, maybe I don't. But I do the shave shower number and come on in, and I don't have to, you can tell by the interview, I don't have to wear a tie all the time. I can dress in a golf shirt if I want to, and except for some guy nails me to a room where I have to do an interview for an hour, I can go play golf when I'm done with my show or whatever. But it's a neat thing, it's just, it's like that, it's a cliche about, some Chinese proverb about it's not work if you enjoy going there every day, and I don't know the exact quote on it, but that's kind of like, I guess that is the one common denominator I have found, is that, we all enjoy doing this, and it's not really work. And we are given some latitude in public. We are given some extra little, maybe, extra piece of something when you go to a restaurant, maybe an extra French fry or something, or the notoriety when you go to the local whatever. But years ago, Roger Miller had a song called Kansas City Star, That's What I Are. And it was about this guy who was in a small town, well, Kansas City, not small, but he was in a medium-sized radio market and TV market. He was a star, and that's kind of what it's all about. Now you can take that on, and you can go on and be Nicolas Cage if you want to be, and a star on the silver screen, or you can find a little niche and just do your thing. But I just enjoy it. I went to school here. I spent a little time over at Drake. I could see that wasn't exactly where I wanted to go, so I just started knocking around on doors, got into the business. A lot of people went up to Brown Institute in Minneapolis and continued. At the time I got into the business, you had to be an engineer. You had to have an engineer's license to be on the radio because you had to read meters. You had to be able to adjust this transmitter. So I had to go to school for that. I had to go to Kansas City, take a test with the FCC. You know, it was a little bit more policed than it is now with deregulation. The FCC just kind of, you know, you said what on the air? Well, don't do that again. We don't want to know about it. But yeah, it was a little more policed at the time. But yeah, it's just the getting up. It's going in. I get in here a little, maybe 5:30. I go on the air at 6. So I take that half hour to maybe get a Diet Coke. Look through the wire service. It's still the wire service is there. Now I have the internet. I can access things. If I need something written, I can sit down at a word processor, do that. If I have an interview coming in, I get that information ready so I know what to ask to talk to the interview about. That kind of stuff. The light goes on at 6:06. The news starts. I'm on after that. The music's already to go. I have little breaks that I know I'm going to talk here, here, and here. That's kind of ready to go. It's really like a pattern. It's kind of all put together. It's kind of loosely sewn together, so that the show is actually one piece. So that there aren't any holes. Yeah, there aren't any holes really in the show. There's room, you know, for a sudden guest that would come in, but. It's all pretty much done, and then at 9 o'clock, you just kind of, for me it's 9, you kind of kick back a little bit, do whatever you want to do, go get a waffle if you want at Perkins, and then come back here and kind of get ready to do for the next day. And then, of course, I'm the program director, so there's things to do. There's always things to do. The other day, I'm driving into work on a Thursday morning about 5:30, and I think, gee, why are all those commercials playing at once? And then I heard like a song, and then more, just one song, and then more commercials. And then it went to the ID as I was getting out of the car in the parking lot, and it wasn't supposed to do that till the top of the hour, and here it was 15 till, and I'm going, something's wrong, and I get in there, and I look at my touch screen in the studio, and all the songs, the boxes that say what the song, all of them are black, which means there is no song. There's no information. So I look over at the production computer, and it's got disk default error, disk error going on, flashing disk error. And so I grabbed one of the old carts that we used to play, stick it in the cart machine and full of dust. I turn the whole board on because it's been in automation all night. So I turn it on and start this song. And then I go to find out the problem. I've lost my hard drive during the night. Oh. I've got 2 hard drives, and each one contains about, well, I suppose 600 songs. Well, one of them is gone. It's just gone. So I called my engineer, and I said, I've lost about 30 hours of music here. Can you come in and help me? So he comes in, takes it apart, and sticks it in the freezer and tries to, you know, comes back and works with me, and we limp this station along all day, and then he comes back and he puts the hard drive in, and it just never was there. All that information was gone. So he threw in a brand new one, and then I just started dubbing music because there's no fast way to dub to a hard drive.
It's all real time.
It's all real time. So that's what I've been doing since last Thursday. My goal was to try and put in like about 75 songs a day if I could, between what I could do and what somebody else could do. And so we'll get back there.
Well, our college station, we're switching automation and a new board this week. So we're just getting ready for the re-streaming of the music. The board was operational last night. They called me this morning after I talked with Max. Lightning hit the board about 7:30.
Oh no!
There goes the circuit board. Just the janitor said to the engineers, he came back from breakfast. He came in at the crack of dawn, did some tweaking, went to breakfast, came back, and the janitor said, "I think something's on fire in there." And sure enough, it was the new board. So it's been a good day for the professor here. Now back to, so I understand the disk default error, and you think, I've just lost the entire music
Library,
library.
yeah.
Absolutely.
When I was in high school, I was working over at KDPS, going to North in the morning and KDPS in the afternoon, and we used to have evening programming too on KDPS. And we had black and white cameras in those days, and I was pulling the tripod of this giant base camera back to put it in the neutral position in the studio, so it was out of the way. And we curled the hose, the cables all up, so they were neat. And the studio looked policed up, so it was nice and neat. And I went out to forget what I was doing. Came back in the studio, and there was smoke coming out of one of the TV cameras. And by the time I went to get a teacher, because I was still a student, I went to get a teacher and came back. There was flames by this time coming out of this camera. And they went and grabbed a fire extinguisher, a special fire extinguisher for electrical fires, and snuffed this thing out. But it was like, that was like the third or fourth week I was up there, and I thought, wow, this TV's exciting.
Yeah.
You know, so
But
I'm sorry you lost your control board.
Well, they think tomorrow they'll have one overnighted. But I set the transmitter on fire in Iowa City because the STL link, the wires kept rubbing in the transmitter shed, and the one night I cut power is when the spark hit. Yeah, so I mean, these are all fun. But
Yes.
anything finally, Steve, that just hits you about,
No,
I mean,
I feel I've rambled on
Well,
too
no,
long
no,
here.
no, no.
But
It's
Des Moines has been a really interesting, market. And geez, I just feel like I've just had the best of the careers. I mean, I bopped out of Des Moines, went to Minneapolis, got hired to go to Denver, got hired to go to Dallas, San Antonio. I mean, wow. I mean, I don't know if I could have gone on or not, but I was satisfied. I guess my internal drive said, hey, we've been out here, we've swum with the sharks, and didn't get eaten alive. And as I alluded earlier, it was the timing to come back to Des Moines was almost it was uncanny. Having a parent pass away and another parent's health wasn't good, and just to have the phone ring and say, in fact, I was at the time, my wife, married to a gal at the time from Des Moines, and I called her. She was still living in Denver when I was in Dallas.
Okay.
And I called her and I said, do you want to go home to Des Moines? And there's no answer on the other end. And then I heard sobbing, and I thought, she wants to go home. So I said, okay, there'll be a Mayflower truck at the door in less than a week. We were all in Des Moines, but yeah, we came. She'd never said a word, about me dragging her and the kids around the country from Minneapolis to Denver to San Antonio, and then they went back to Denver, and I went to Dallas. But I've just met a lot of neat people, and they're all in. Some of them are gone now, so they're just mostly in my mind. I can hear them talking. I mean, when I was in Denver, working at a country station in Denver, sitting on a bar stool, talking to Eddie Rabbitt, Waylon Jennings. I mean, they're gone. Both of them are gone. Willie Nelson walks in. Jesse Coulter, all these kind of people, Michael Martin Murphy, all these people that were out there, they were just sitting around in the Big Bear Saloon up there in Evergreen, just quaffing down some beers, and we're just sitting there talking. I mean, RCA hadn't come into the picture yet. They were all on the brink. I mean, they were all traveling. They were all in that soon-to-be discovered phase. But you think, geez, I was sitting there talking to those people. And you see them, and then it's just amazing. One of my heroes, a guy that had a record series out, the Weird Beard, Russ Knight, was at K-Box Radio in Dallas. When I was down there, he has a series of records out like Art LeBeau and oldies, and to get to work with Weird Beard, Russ Knight. I mean, here was a guy who was nationally famous and everything else. What? We're only up to when I'm 17. We're only up to when I'm 17.
He's telling me why he loves working for you.
Yeah.
You want to?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
But we were about done. It was a short quote.
And he only makes me trim the bushes once a month,
Hey, my car needs washing,
and I only have to wash this car after it gets dirty.
but he does a good job. I do want to buy you lunch.
Well, I'll take you up on that.
All right.
Was that your bad eye, or are you looking at me or him? I can't tell when you got that Marty Feldman eye there. I
Hey, I
can't.
bought you lunch once.
Oh yeah, but I wasn't working here then.
72, was it?
Yeah,
good?
72. Anyway.
Well, you can't imagine doing anything else.
Yeah, I really can. Just the names, Wolfman Jack, we were talking about him earlier, sitting on a couch down there in Dallas, just talking to Wolfman Jack, just, you know, I mean, he's stretched out, he's got his feet up on the end table, he's drinking a Diet Coke, and the phone's ringing, and this manager's answering phones, and, hey, you want to talk to, oh, no, baby, I don't want to talk to you. You know, I mean, it's just, you know, just a thing. And then to see these people on the screen or to see them on the radio or on the TV or something and say, geez, I was just sitting there talking to them. And look at all the people I've interviewed over the years, the stars that have come through Des Moines and worked at and performed at the old KRNT theater. It used to be a thing that if you performed, and we didn't even talk about that, the KRNT theater was the largest legitimate theater west of the Mississippi River for a long, long time. And all these people came in, they had to go on KRNT radio. It was like in their contract.
That was part of the performance.
And, you know,
deal.
and
Okay.
here you'd interview all these people. And I got in on just the tail end of that. But a little bit of that carried over a little bit when they'd come to Des Moines and go to the Civic Center. You know, you get the Bill Cosbys to come in, or you'd get the guys who were with Carol Burnett. My mind just went blank here, but Harvey Korman, Tim Conway's, those kind of people would come in, and you do the interviews, and just so amazing to interview these people, vice presidents. You know, people, you know, just talk to Ross Perot and all these people. It's just amazing how you get to talk to all these people. It really is something. I often thought of, I should have started not only an autograph book, which would have been fantastic, but I should have started taking pictures of sunrises I've seen over the last 40 years. Sunrises, a morning man's sunrises from different studio windows. Because when I went to Minneapolis, I thought, boy, I'm in the major market. I'm up in Minneapolis, St. Paul. The studios were overlooking a bean field, cornfield kind of thing. The IDS tower, the Twin Cities, was like 1,000 miles. You know, I mean, you could see it, you know, and the little beacon going off in the dusk of the Cedar Valley up there. You know, oh yeah, there's the Twin Cities. But you know, here, you know, you look out the window in the morning, and here'd be cows munching on field pastures or something.
And here we are in Minneapolis.
Yeah, here we are in Minneapolis, St. Paul, trying to play Alice Cooper. That was different. That was a different part of my life. Playing Alice Cooper and Twisted Sister and all those things up there. That was the rock era. Yeah, different time.
That just comes down to doing something you love.
Yeah. I played country. I played rock. I played middle of the road, band, big bands, just about everything. You know. Which
is really what most people who have any longevity in the business, you wind up playing about every form of
yeah. If you want to put, you know, beans on the table and buy those kids shoes, you got to do something. But
they seem to need them.
Yeah, really do. Ended up on several blooper reels. I'm on blooper reels in several cities where I've made mistakes. Some are funny to me, some are embarrassing, but they're all there for posterity. So.
Well, that's the thing, you can't take it back.
No. I've seen some goofy things. I've seen some things that best die with me and never be repeated in the business. So interesting. I've had some sad things. Had a saddest thing that ever happened to me at KSO out on Broadway. Young gal whose husband had just been killed in Vietnam came into the studio about 10 o'clock at night. I was working from 6 to 10. She wanted me to play a song for her husband who had just been killed in Nam. And I did so, and with the reverence that I could, you know, give to something that I didn't really know a lot about, and but just the fact that she'd stopped in to see me and to ask me to play the song, and then I finished my show at midnight, went home, got some sleep. I had a day job. I worked for the city of Des Moines, doing concrete work. So I got up, went to work. Police car pulled up while I was out there working for the city on this sidewalk crew, and I was running the chute. Concrete was coming down, and getting ready to smooth it off and finish it and edge it and stuff and cut it and go on to the next sidewalk. And this policeman came over and asked me if I'd was a guy that was on the radio, and I thought, oh boy, he wants an autograph.
Yeah, knows who I am. Yeah.
And said no. He says, well, he says, could you come with me, please? And I went. He took me downtown, and I went into this room, and there was a bunch of people in suits in there, and a couple of patrol officers, highway patrol officers were in there too. And come to find out, this young girl had gone out and committed suicide, but she had included my name in the note that she wrote in the car. And boy, that just took the wind right out of my sails. I went from, oh, you want an autograph, to, you know, this kind of a scenario, and it was just. They gave me the rest of the week off. I didn't do my show for 2 or 3 days, and came back on Monday. And of course, the public didn't know about the note. At this time, suicides were a little more hush hush, and they didn't have the National Enquirer trying to figure out why everything happens in the universe. But that's probably one of the saddest moments in my career.
So she requests the song and then goes out and apparently.
Yeah, she
I mean,
pulled along a
presumably
gravel
was
road
listening to it.
near somewhere out in the area where she could still hear it. And she had this little note, and she said, you know, and I want to thank, you know, Steve Gibbons for playing a song for Bill and me, and blah blah blah. Yeah, that was probably the lowest moment in my early career, and probably for my whole career. I can't remember anything else ever affecting anybody that I've ever done like that or affected me.
You know, we talk about broadcasting's effect, but we never. I mean, that's a whole different. Oh gosh. Well, let's turn it the other way. What's the highest moment that you can think of?
Oh, there's been a lot of high moments. A lot of high moments. Just like I said earlier, the people I've met, the places I've gone. I mean, here recently, just in the last 3 years, we're talking about KRNT. We've got into this thing with AAA Travel out of the Quad Cities, where we've been booking listeners to go to foreign ports, you know, to foreign cities, foreign countries, and until the tragedy of New York and of the Pentagon, and then that plane crash in Pennsylvania, until those tragic plane crashes, we were taking 40, 50, 60 people with us and going to neat places. We went to St. Petersburg, Russia, went all through Russia, went through the Nordic countries, Panama Canal, went into South America with these listeners, have gone to cruised around Hawaii. Took 2 weeks and just went all around Hawaii, you know, and just stayed on this ship, went to all the islands. Went to Alaska, did that thing, you know, you cruise the Inside Passage. We had like 90-some people with us that day. So that kind of thing is the plus, is that, you know, you get to go on all these wonderful trips and see all your listeners. And a lot of my listeners have spendable income because of their ages. They have time. They have time that they can do this stuff. So,
and that's neat, because normally you're talking to yourself in a room.
Yeah.
And to have that, the other side is really...
To have people willing to put their money on you to go on a nice trip, because these trips aren't cheap. I mean, you're talking about sometimes $2,000, $4,000, $6,000 each. So a couple going out there spending $12,000 to go with you, a radio announcer, on a 2-week trip, that's a lot of trust. I mean, so anyway, yeah. It's just, I guess... just the way people make you feel has got to be, that's got to be the way they make me feel. That's got to be the biggest thing I can think of in my career, is to have somebody, you know, trust you that much, you know, with that kind of emotion. But it just happens every day. It's not every day, but I mean, it happens so often.
Yeah.
It happens so often that it never ceases to amaze me. And I can't think of the artist, I can't think of the actor's name. It's not Kevin Costner, but the guy that was in that Rookie film.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I read the book,
My
but
mind's a blank right now, but he says, we get to go out and play baseball today. It all comes back to that. That is so succinct.
Yeah.
We get to be on the radio today. I mean, why would anybody, why would I want to do anything else? So, yeah, I think we all feel that in a way. So maybe a salesman feels that way. I get to sell something today.
get to help this
I
person.
get to, or a
with their
doctor
business.
or whatever.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
got
Oh,
to be,
sure, sure.
but if you can find that niche,
Doesn't get any better, does it?
the universe kind of comes into alignment a little better just in that one area. And, if you can get your other parts of your life to do that, if you can find that man or woman, and
Yeah,
if you can
yeah.
find that, that job, and you kind of get these things all kind of going, it's just like,
That is, that's right.
Is there-
It gets no better than that.
but
Steve, I